Good day. Today we are going to discuss the Chapter 9 Moral Deliberation.
So before we start our discussion, we are going to tell you the learning objectives of this chapter. Number one is to identify and differentiate the levels of moral development. Number two, classify the difference of moral developments using their own perspectives. Number three is to apply the lesson in their own perspectives for them to make their own moral problems and resolve it on their own. So, what is moral development? Moral development is a crucial aspect of human growth and development. It refers to the process through which individuals acquire moral values, beliefs, and principles that guide their behavior in different situations. So, sa madaling salita po, yung moral development is proseso siya kung saan papanunlad natin yung ating pag-unawa sa kung ano ba yung tama at mali. Nakapaalog din po sa moral development yung pag-unawa natin sa mga ethical principles at kung paano natin ito ma-apply sa ating pang-araw-araw na pamumuhay. Yung moral development po is mahalaga dahil tinutulungan po natin or tinutulungan tayo nito na mahubog yung pagkatao natin at sa pamamagitan po ng moral development, ginagabayan tayo nito sa kung ano yung mga gagawin nating kilos kung ito po ba ay maituturing na morally acceptable. So according to Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development, there are 6 stages of moral development that explains how individuals develop their own moral reasoning and ethical decision-making abilities. He divided the 6 stages into 3 levels. The level 1 is what he called the pre-conventional level, level 2 is the conventional level, and the level 3 is the post-conventional level. Each level is consist into 2 stages. So before we take a look at the different stages of moral development according to Kohlberg, first let me show you a situational example that illustrates the different stages of moral development. So the dilemma of a man who steals medicine to save his dying wife. So sa pamamagitan po ng situational example na ito, malalaman natin kung paano nga ba or ano nga ba yung magiging action ng man sa bawat stages ng moral development. So let's start with the level 1 or what Lawrence Kohlberg called the pre-conventional level, which is common among children, kung paano pa sila mag-isip or kumilos. Nakafocus to sa mga kahinatnan ng mga action na gagawin ng isang individual. So, tinawag niya itong pre-conventional kasi tumutukoy ito sa first 2 stages of moral development. So, sa stage 1, tinatawag itong punishment and obedience orientation. Sa stage 1, individual base their moral judgment or action solely on avoiding punishment. They believe that breaking rules will result in negative consequences for themselves or for others. So they obey rules because they obey rules to avoid punishments. Children do good because they don't want to be punished. Say, for example, a child may refrain from stealing a toy because they fear of being scolded or punished by their parents. So, yung basis nila dito para malaman nila kung tama or mali ba yung action or behavior na ginagawa nila ay kapag yung behavior or action na ginagawa nila is nag-lead into a punishment. Then, kapag nag-lead sa punishment, yung action na ginawa nila, then yung action na yon is wrong, mali. Then, kapag naman ay hindi sila naparusahan sa action na ginawa nila, then it is correct. There's nothing wrong with it. So, kung babalikan natin yung situational example kanina, ano ba sa tingin nyo yung magiging action ng man? So, kung mag-base tayo dito sa stage 1, nanakawin niya pa ba or hindi? So, the answer is no. Hindi niya na ipagpapatuloy na nakawin yung medicine. Kasi mag-focus na lang siya sa kung ano ba yung dapat niyang gawin para ma-avoid yung punishment. So, sa stage 1, nakafocus siya kung paano ma-avoid yung punishment. Ano ba yung mga actions na gagawin natin para ma-avoid yung punishment. So, moving on to stage 2, he called it the instrumental relativist orientation. So, individuals begin to consider their own interests while making moral decisions. They understand that there can be different perspectives and opinions regarding what is right or wrong. An example of this stage would be when someone decides to share their toys with others because they expect reciprocity in return. Those who are in this stage do good to others or do moral behaviors because they want something in return. They act out of self-interest. They do something because they expect something in return. Yun yung karaniwang ginagawa ng mga bata. Yun yung motivation nila. Gagawa sila ng mabuti para sa iba. Kasi at the end of the day, ibabalik din nila yung kabutihan na ibinigay ko sa kanila. So now, what would do in stage 2 say about the situational example earlier? They would say something like he should steal the drug because if he does that, eventually his wife would have to repay him for his kindness. Or they may say like he should not steal the drug because if he steals the drug, he will be in jail, and that would not be good for him. So they act out of self interest. What is the best for me? Or what can others do for me? And that's for the first two stages, and that's for the pre conventional level.
Level 2, Conventional Level. The second level of moral development. So what is second level of moral development? According to Kohlberg, is the conventionals, since this is the age in which older children, adolescents, and young adults learn to conform to the expectation of society. Ano is ibig sabihin nito? At this level, individuals develop a sense of social conformity and learn to take into account others' opinions and feelings when making moral decisions. There are two stages within this level, Stage 3 and Stage 4. At ano ang pinagkaiba nitong dalawa? Stage 3. At this stage, individuals strive to be seen as a good person by those around them. They seek to conform to the expectation of their family, friends, and society as a whole. Now, kung babalikan natin yung example kanina, there are two options that the man can do in stage 3. Those stage 3 would say he or the man should not steal the drug, or maybe he should steal the drug. He should not steal the drug because that's not something a good person would do. That's something only criminals would do. Or maybe he should steal the drug because that's what a good husband will do, something that will please the wife. And next is the stage 4. At this stage, individuals understand the importance of maintaining social order and functioning of society. They realize that rules and laws help to achieve this and feel a sense of duty to uphold them. So going back to the example situational, they may see something like the man should not steal because stealing is prohibited. It is punishable by law. Regardless of any reason, stealing is bad. So that's something that would be said by someone in stage number 4.
Lawrence Kohlberg's moral development theory consists of 6 stages, which are divided into 3 levels. Each level represents a different way of reasoning about moral dilemmas. The third level, or also known as the post-conventional level, is further divided into two stages. The first stage is the stage 5, which is the social contract and individual rights. And the second one is the stage 6, which is the universal ethical principles. Through post-conventional level is recognized that there are different perspectives and values across different societies and cultures, and they begin to question and evaluate these norms. So at stage 5, individuals focus on the social contract and individual rights. They understand that societies function best when there is a social contract that consists of mutual agreed upon rules, laws, and procedures that promote the welfare of all members. So at the stage 6, individuals must develop universal ethical principles. They base their moral judgments on abstract principles of justice, equality, and human rights. These principles are self-chosen and are not dependent on any particular society or group. It's important to note that Kohlberg's theory has been subject to criticism, including its cultural bias and its focus on cognitive development rather than emotional and contextual factors in moral reasoning. But the concept of post-conventional morality highlights the development of individual ethical reasoning beyond rule following and conformity to group norms. So applying Kohlberg's theory of moral development in our daily life can help us to understand our own moral reasoning and make more informed ethical decisions. So self-reflection may help us to reflect on our own moral development and identify the stage you currently occupy. So consider how your moral reasoning has evolved over time and what factors have influenced your thinking. So also the enhanced moral reasoning will engage in activities that promote moral reasoning and ethical decision making. This can include reading ethical literature, participating in discussions or debates, and also exploring real-life moral dilemmas. So, we must remember that moral development is a gradual process and individuals may not always consistently operate at the highest stages of moral reasoning. So, the goal is to continually reflect, learn, and grow in your ethical thinking and actions.
Feelings in moral deliberation. Emotions or feelings have long been derided by purely rationalistic perspective as having no place in a properly executed moral decision. A more realistic attitude toward decision making is to appreciate the indispensable role emotion have in the agent act of choosing. Minsan yung emotion or feeling, marahil sa iba ay iniisip nila na yun is hindi dapat kasama sa pagdesisyon, meron tayong mga emotions na sobrang hirap mag-decide, lalo na sa love. Like, bibitawan mo ba siya or hindi kasi mahal mo siya. Hindi rin natin pwede iwasan na mag-decide without feelings since hindi naman tayo mga robot. Aristotle precisely points out that moral virtue goes beyond the mere act of intellectually identifying the right thing to do. So sabi ni Aristotle, yung moral virtues hindi lang siya kumbaga utak ang ginagamit. Like parang alam mo lang basta yung tama. So since alam natin yung tama or mali, nagkakaroon tayo ng development on how to connect it into feelings. Kumbaga, we should handle ng tama yung emotion natin in doing decisions since nagde-develop siya. For example, kung pinalaki kang tama ng magulang mo, kapag gumawa ka ng mali, you will feel guilt, di ba? If hindi ka naman pinalaki ng tama, wala kang mararamdaman kundi galit. So, nagde-develop yung feelings natin sa situation kung saan tama ba or mali yung mga desisyon na yon. Part of the genius of Aristotle is his realization that it is possible that there can be a disconnect between intellectual knowledge of the good and the actual ability of an individual to perform accordingly. So sabi rin ni Aristotle, being good doesn't mean na kailangan na natin ignore yung emotions natin. At utak lang ang gamitin natin para gumawa ng desisyon. Kumbaga, we should learn how to handle our feelings in a right way. For example, madaling magalit ang isang tao pero mahirap magalit sa isang mabuting tao. May mabuting rason in a right way. In conclusion, doing the right thing or decision means being able to control our feelings. So pinupush tayo ng emotions natin to do what is right. Yung feelings natin is connected sa kung anong bagay man ang iniingatan natin. Ang importante is to learn to develop our feelings hindi lang para makatulong sa sarili natin, pero para sa iba rin. To summarize, Aristotle said, being a good person means learning to manage our feelings in a way that help us make good choices. It's not about ignoring our emotion, but about using them wisely.
So in this slide, I'm going to explain why feelings in moral deliberations are still important in order to make a right moral decisions. So despite the fact that many people believes that in order to be able to create a right moral decisions, you need to set aside your feelings and emotions, when in actuality you don't. You don't need to set aside your feelings and emotions. They are important in making the right moral decisions, and it does not make any decisions you make along the way to be selfish or self-serving. And instead, it shows your beliefs and shows how strong they are and how much you're willing to stand by those beliefs, no matter what. To be able to cultivate your emotions, to avoid childish decisions, and would instead consider others as part of your decisions, would lead to better choices that would not harm you or the people around you. And knowing that you are, as a person, has the capability to affect everyone and everything around you is a vital knowledge in making a mature and right moral decisions. We are a byproduct of everything we choose, and we are at this very moment because of the choices that we make. And this is why feelings in moral deliberations are still very important to this day.
Ang report ko po ay what must a morally matured individual do when confronted with a moral problem. Ito ang goal na ating sasagutin, pero bago natin masagot ang tanong na ito, dapat natin malaman muna na merong iba't ibang uri ng moral problems. At mga moral problems na ito ay nagre-require ng mga particular set rational deliberation. So, ano nga ba ang gagawin when confronted with a potential ethical issue? Mayroon tayong 4 na step that we ought to take. So, the first steps that morally matured person ought to take o dapat gawin if confronted by a potential ethical issue to determine the level of involvement. A level of involvement in the case of or situation. So, when come to ethical decision making, it's important to first identify our level of environment sa sitwasyon. This can help us determine whether we need to take action or simply make a object judgment. After natin ma-determine ang involvements natin sa sitwasyon at nagsasabing hindi naman tayo directly involved in the situation, but are simply making judgment, we can still exercise our moral imagination and consider that we would do in a similar situation. Kung mangyari man sa future, this can help us develop our moral reasoning and decision-making skill. However, it's important to be clear about the difference between making a judgment and taking action, and to ensure that we're not confusing one for the other. Kung na-determine naman natin parte tayo doon sa sitwasyon at nangangailangan ng nangangailangan mag-take ng action. We must consider our moral responsibility and ensure that we are making the best decision possible. This may involve weighing o pagtitimbang sa mga pros and cons of different courses of action, considering the potential impact on others, and making the decision that aligned with our values and principles. In any case, it's important to strive for moral responsibility in our decision making and to consider the impact of our action on others. This requires carefully reflection and introspection, as well as willingness to learn and grow in our understanding of ethical principles. Pagkatapos naman natin ma-determine ang ating involvement sa masabing potential moral issue, ang pangalawang step that we ought to take ay to make sure of the facts. Ibig sabihin po, it's crucial to proper identify moral situation and gathered all the relevant facts before making a decision. It's essential to distinguish moral situation from aesthetic or etiquette matters and to separate fact from assumptions. In order to make the informed and responsible moral decisions, mahalagang ma-examine natin lahat ng relevant facts and details without being swayed by unreliable sources or base information. Gathering accurate and unbased information is a critical step in the ethical decision-making process, as it ensures a fair evaluation of the situation and eliminate the risk of making baseless choices or unfounded conclusions. When faced with a potential moral dilemma, it's important to approach the situation with an open mind and a willingness to learn. This required being attentive to the details and actively seeking out additional information that may be needed for a proper assessment of the situation. Ultimately, the goal of ethical decision-making is to make choices that align with one's values and principles, while also taking into consideration the welfare of all those affected by the decision. This requires a careful consideration of both the factual and moral aspect of the situation, and the willingness to set aside personal bias or assumptions in a favor of objective evidence and ethical principles. After we make sure of facts, the third step that we ought to take is to identify all the individuals who may be affected by our decision and actions. These people are called stakeholders, and they can include not only the people directly involved in the situation, but also those who could be indirectly impacted. By considering the needs and perspective of all stakeholders, we are forced to think beyond our own self-interest. They help us to avoid making selfish or short-sighted decisions and instead strive for a more balanced and equitable outcome. It's important to remember that ethical decision making isn't just about satisfying our own desire, but also about the ensuring that we are considered the welfare of everyone involved. This includes not only the people directly affected by our action, but also those who may be impacted indirectly. When, in the, when identifying stakeholders, it's essential to gather all the relevant information and to evaluate the potential impact of our choice on its individual. Mm, This can be challenged, but it's necessary step toward making responsible and ethical decisions. The goal of this step is to balance the need and interests of all stakeholders and to find the best possible solution that take into account the, the welfare of everyone involved. This required carefully consideration, self-awareness, and willingness to put the needs of others ahead of our own.
Now that we have established the facts and identified the stakeholders and their concerns in the matter, let us now proceed to identifying ethical issue at hand. There are several types of ethical problems or issues. The first type is situation needs clarification. When we encounter a moral dilemma or situation, we may need to determine if a particular action is morally right or wrong. This is where ethical theories or frameworks can help us to guide our thinking and decision making. Ethical theories provide different perspectives on why certain actions are right or wrong and what makes them so. Some examples of ethical theories include utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. Utilitarianism emphasizes the importance of maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering for the greatest number of people. Deontology believes that our actions should conform to universal moral duties and principles. Virtue ethicists focus on character traits such as courage and compassion, and believe that morally good actions are ones that express those traits. By evaluating a situation through the lens of different ethical theories, we can gain new insights and perspective that can help us to resolve the moral dilemma and make a more informed decision. By considering multiple ethical frameworks, we can also better understand the ethical reasons behind our decision and potential consequences of those decisions. The second type of ethical situation involves determining whether a particular action in question can be identified with a generally accepted ethical or unethical action. This type of determination is based on social norms and cultural values that are commonly held by a particular group of people. For example, let's consider the act of lying. In most cultures, lying is generally considered to be unethical and is frowned upon. This means that if someone were to lie, they would likely be perceived as acting unethically and might face social consequences as a result. However, there may be instances where lying is not considered as unethical. For example, if someone were to lie in order to protect someone else's safety or to preserve a valuable relationship, it might be viewed as more ethically neutral act. So in order to determine whether a particular action can be identified with a generally accepted ethical or unethical action, it is important to consider the cultural and social context in which action is taking place. This requires an understanding of norms, values, and beliefs of the community in question, and appreciation of the nuances and complexities of ethical decision making in different contexts. The third type of ethical situation involves identifying an ethical dilemma. A dilemma is a situation in which there are competing values that seems to have equal worth, and it's important to recognize and clearly state the ethical issue at hand. This can be particularly challenging when faced with a choice between two competing ethical goods or between two evils. In such situation, it is important to identify the fundamental values in conflict and formulate a solution that balances their interests and as much as possible. The individual must weigh different options and consider the consequences for all stakeholders involved before making a decision. To navigate these ethical dilemmas effectively, individuals must be able to identify the different choices available and evaluate the trade-offs between them. This requires a deep understanding of the unique ethical issues at play and willingness to engage in open, honest dialogue with all stakeholders involved. Ultimately, the goal is to find a solution that honors the competing values while also providing the best outcome for everyone involved. Let's consider an example of an ethical dilemma. A doctor is faced with a patient who has a rare and potentially fatal disease. The doctor has access to an experimental treatment that could cure the patient, but this treatment is still in the early stages of development and has not yet been approved by regulatory bodies. The doctor must decide whether to treat the patient with the experimental treatment, knowing that it may not be safe, or to risk the patient's life by withholding the treatment until it undergoes further testing. In this situation, the doctor must weigh the competing values of the patient's welfare and the ethical and legal obligation to provide only medically approved treatments. They must also consider the potential consequences of their decisions for the patient and the other stakeholders, such as the other medical professionals or regulatory bodies. Ultimately, the doctor must find a balance between these values and make a decisions that honors the best interests of all involved.
The last step of stakeholders refer to the final stage in which all parties involved had an opportunity to voice their opinion concern that may affect up by their decision, and considering the perspective and value, organization can make more ethical choice that benefit everyone involved. That's mean decision making is a hard things to do in last of stakeholders. Decision making is hard thing to do in stakeholders dahil hindi lang iisang tao yung kailangan mong isipin, kundi lahat ng tao na nandun sa inyong problema. Sa decision making is hindi lang yung basta-basta ka mag-decision. Dapat iisipin mo rin yung consequences na sa decision na gagawin mo. Hindi lang yung consequences mo, dapat pati yung consequences sa lahat ng tao sa paligid mo. Hindi yung ano lang mangyayari sa akin, paano naman yung iba. Dapat lagi mong iisipin yung magiging consequences din ng nasa paligid, hindi lang iisa, para magkaroon din ng magandang terms or magandang benefits sa lahat pag naggawa ka ng decision.
Moving on to the value studying ethical theories or frameworks. What then is the role of ethical theories or frameworks in the continuing cultivation of one's capacity of moral choice? It is said that these important things serve as guideposts because they can shed light on many important considerations, though, of course, not all. This is where we are going to encounter the twin question, which is the what ought I do and what ought to do. I ought means to indicate duty or obligation. Additionally, what ought I do means these things are morally right to do, while ought to do means to do what we desire. On the other hand, utilitarianism in simple words are an ethical theory that determines the right from wrong by focusing on the outcome. It is also said that it puts more attention on the common good. Moving on to the natural law theory. On the other hand, this puts more emphasis on the supposed objective, but is to be basing its reasoning on the theorized existence of human nature. It is also said that this has the advantage of both objectivity and a kind of intuitiveness. Lastly, whatever is right is what feels right. Means, kung ano sa piling natin ay tama, ito ay tama. Halimbawa na lang whenever we encounter things we are unsure of, but our gut feels says the otherwise. Kaya dito nasasama ang intuitiveness.
So, here is Kantian deontology that puts a premium on rational will, freed from all other considerations as the only human capacity that can determine one's moral duty, and Aristotle's virtue ethics indicates the need for habituation of one's character to make any and all of these rigorous considerations possible. To weigh the collective happiness of human beings, to choose to act on what one's innermost nature dictates, to practice one's autonomy regardless of all other considerations, especially those who impinge on one's will. So Kant's claim that the moral status of our actions is determined on the basis of the rightness and wrongness of the action itself. His analysis of the common concept of duty and good will lead him to believe that we are free and autonomous as long as morality itself is not an illusion. Ancient deontology means that one should act following a certain principles regardless of the consequences. This deontology falls within the domain of moral theories that guide or assess our choices of what we ought to do or what should we do. According to Kant, there are certain moral laws that are universal and we have a duty to follow them. So, for example, someone's family are dying because of starvation. So, ang naisip niyang solusyon dito is magnakaw. So, kung ipibase natin to on Kant's approach, he would say that stealing is always wrong regardless of the consequences. And in contrast with this, if we base it on Aristotle's virtue ethics, that is more concerned with what kind of a person we should be, he would say that if a virtuous person would not steal in a particular set of circumstances, then it is wrong to steal in those circumstances. So, to sum it up, Kant's deontology focuses on what we ought to do or what should we do, while Aristotle's virtue ethics is more concerned of what kind of a person we should be. This virtue ethics helps us understand what it means to be a virtuous human being, and it gives us a guide for living without giving us specific rules for resolving ethical dilemmas.
What must to do and why must to do so. This study of ethics helps a person to look at his own life critically and to evaluate his actions, choices, and decisions. It assists a person in knowing who he or she, what's best for him or her, and what he or she has to do in order to attain it. Through the guides of ethics, we can avoid those things we shouldn't do. Also to aware us what our actions affect those people around us. Important consideration, not all of us can identify the twin question, what must to do and why must to do so. Philosophers have discussed the theoretical way of understanding morality and ethics and have theorized various ways to guide moral living. As for my example, a parent should or must take care of their children. It is an ethical obligatory for them to feed their children, provide their needs, be there for their children through ups and downs, and to support them emotionally, physically, and mentally. In short, it is their responsibility to take care of their children. Also, that's the right thing to do to help them grow on the path they choose. We should always be guided of what we should do and why we need to do it. By applying an ethics to yourself, you can make decisions critically, knowing what is wrong and right. You can act properly to grow on your path and develop your moral, skills, and your mind.